Thank you so much for joining me, Tony. So this issue around a 107-year-old organization that's been running a democratic government for the last 25 years, not having something as simple as a sexual harassment policy at its headquarters, has really got us talking about this. How common is it that you find big organizations that, you know, on face value, you would expect that surely if anyone knows about these things, it would be this organization, only to find out that they don't have a sexual harassment policy?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, Tulani. Yes, indeed, it is surprising. I think especially from government, which does, of course, obligate all employers to have sexual harassment policies and to deal with the whole question of sexual harassment, first of all, in a proactive way in terms of trying to prevent it via policy and other interventions. And then, of course, in response to cases that arise, to deal with them through the normal disciplinary processes. It's not unusual for employers, funnily enough, and unfortunately, for employers not to have sexual harassment policies, but one would think that, of course, government departments would have one.
So what is the value of a sexual harassment policy? Because it's very easy for any institution or organization to say we stand against the harassment of women and the abuse of women, which is what the Daily Maverick, for example, reports that they found when they were looking at this looking for sexual harassment policies of other political organizations. So what does a sexual harassment policy stated and written out and distributed and communicated with everyone, what does it achieve?
Well, look, it achieves quite a bit. It highlights the fact that sexual harassment is prohibited. It emphasizes that to employees that the employer takes sexual harassment very seriously. It lays down the consequences for sexual harassment, and it keeps it front of mind in the mind of employees, especially if one reinducts on this kind of policy on an annual basis. So, of course, it's not going to necessarily prevent or eliminate sexual harassment at the workplace, but it most certainly does reduce the number of incidents that are likely to occur.
Would you say then not having one says a lot about how seriously you take the issue of sexual harassment?
Well, look, either it's an oversight. I'm not so sure it necessarily says that. It may indeed do that indirectly. Perhaps one could read into the fact that an employer does not have a sexual harassment policy, that they don't take sexual harassment as seriously as they should. It could be an oversight. There could be many other policies that they should have that they don't have as well. But most certainly in this day and age, given the growing incidents and the exposure, and of course the fact that it's such a topical subject, and the fact that it's a legal obligation in terms of, for example, the Employment Equity Act, that employers should, as a preventative measure as much as anything else, have a sexual harassment policy which confirms the fact that sexual harassment, of course, is prohibited, and that there will be very serious consequences for any perpetrators.
How effective are these policies, these sexual harassment policies, Tony? Do they, for instance, assist in terms of someone who's facing and is on the receiving end of sexual harassment and unwanted sexual advances and inappropriate behavior, to be able to raise this and ensure that it's attended to?
Very much so, very much so. Of course, these policies, amongst other things, deals with how these issues are to be raised sensitively and confidentially, and indeed the disciplinary consequences for a perpetrator. It's also quite interesting that the definition of sexual harassment is far broader than many would at first glance think that it is. It includes, for example, inappropriate sexual innuendo, which a layperson might not consider to be sexual harassment, but very much is in terms of the definition, which, as I've said, is extremely broad.
And it can't be hard to put together, is it? Or am I assuming? Because I think there are guides, there are guidelines. For instance, the CCMA seems to have some guidelines that could perhaps form sort of the mainframe of a company or a political organization's sexual harassment policy.
That's quite right. You know, we have a schedule at the back of the Labour Relations Act which deals with this precise subject in some detail and deals with it very thoroughly and very well. So an employer could, as a port of call, simply refer to that code of good practice at the back of the Labour Relations Act, and all the information they need to compile a sexual harassment policy is there for them to see and to put into writing as they see fit, to use for their own purposes.
All right, thank you so much. That is Tony Healy from Labour firm Tony Healy and Associates, talking to us there about the importance of sexual harassment policies after, of course, it came to light that the ANC is only now set to develop its sexual harassment policy for its headquarters following the period of time that Pule Mabe, the national spokesperson, was on voluntary leave while investigations were continuing there.